Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Gifford. I'm the Research Director with the Integrative Benefits Institute. Thank you for joining us for the fifth of our pre-forum webinars. Today, we're very fortunate to have a presentation by Laura Putnam of Motion Infusion, Sarah Johnson of ProChange Behavior, and Crockett Dale of HealthStat. And they'll be talking about why managers hold the key to better well-being. Before we start, I will turn the presentation over to the speakers. You will have the opportunity to ask questions via the question interface that you see on the GoToWebinar application on your desktop. Feel free to ask questions, push them along at any time during the conversation, and I will relay those to the speakers during the Q&A. Before we get started, before I hand it over, a little bit about the Integrated Benefits Institute. IBI provides unbiased research and insights so that employers and that their provider partners can make decisions that positively impact the success of what we talk about as people, productivity, and performance. If there's a core message that IBI has, it's that while everybody recognizes that illness has costs, we always want to emphasize that good health actually creates values. And we talk about that message through our own independent research, through our benchmarking data set and our analytics, and through educational opportunities such as these webinars, but also through our forum, which will begin on Monday, this coming Monday, at the Westin St. Francis in San Francisco. If you're interested, please check out ibiweb.org. With that, let me hand over the presentation to Laura Putnam.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being on the call. Brian, thank you so much. And IBI, thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be with all of you today to talk about a really important topic, which is this idea of engaging managers in well-being and why we think that this is so critical. I received this email from a wellness program manager, Gina Rappaport, and she says in the email, I'm in the market for a vendor to help make our program more cohesive and to increase participation. This is something that we hear over and over again. So perhaps more simply put, we have a crisis of engagement. That is, I think all of us have learned the hard way that unlike the field of dreams, as in if you build it like a workplace wellness program, they, as in the people that we're trying to reach, will not necessarily come. And along with that, we have what you might call an all-you-can-eat buffet often, where people feel overwhelmed by all of the different choices and want to feel like things are instead curated for them. So how can we start to address both of these issues? And what the three of us are convinced of, and what the research suggests, is that in fact, in addressing these two critical issues, particularly the issue of engagement, it is likely that managers hold the key. And in fact, according to Gallup, managers likely account for up to 70% of the variance of their team members' engagement, both with their work and also with their well-being. And so while there has historically been a tremendous emphasis placed on engaging senior leader support, what we believe and what the research suggests is that in fact, senior leaders likely set the tone and certainly allocate resources, but really it comes down to managers to effectively give permission or not to their team members to actually engage with those offerings. So in effect, every manager should be asking themselves the question, am I acting as a multiplier or am I acting as a gatekeeper? Where am I on this spectrum? And if a manager is not intentionally and explicitly engaging with well-being, then in fact, they are likely acting as a gatekeeper as opposed to a multiplier of well-being. And we believe that every manager has a potential to become that multiplier of well-being. And when they do embrace this role, then we can start to see a change in the level of engagement. So in a sense, every manager has an opportunity to ask themselves, am I going to stick my head in the sand and pretend like this wellness stuff doesn't matter? Or am I going to put on my cape and become this multiplier of well-being?
So in our short time together today, we would like to provide you with an overview of the Managers on the Move experience, talk about the way we've been able to demonstrate the impact of this experience on both managers and team members, and share some qualitative reflections from an employer who has offered this workshop to his team members and to his clients, and then end with some key insights for you to take away, and of course provide you with an opportunity to ask some questions.
So let's begin with an overview of Managers on the Move. Managers on the Move is a program that represents a collaboration between my company, Motion Infusion, and ProChange Behavior Systems. So Motion Infusion is a well-being and learning organization that is known for leveraging best practices from the world of L&D and education to create a context for well-being. We developed the actual workshop for this Managers on the Move program, which is the experience.
And ProChange is an internationally recognized research and development company that's comprised of behavior change scientists and software developers. And we are best known for the systematic implementation of best practices in behavior change to inform the development and evaluation of a whole variety of well-being solutions. And we developed and deliver the proprietary assessment that helps evaluate the impact of Manager on the Move so that we can validate that this is an effective solution for employers.
So I will be talking about the workshop itself, and then as Sarah just shared, she'll then be following that up with a discussion about the actual findings from implementing this day-long workshop. So this day-long workshop is what you might characterize as kind of a well-being meets leadership development. So it really empowers managers in organizations such as these are the organizations that that have experienced the impact of Managers on the Move. It empowers managers to understand the role that they play in becoming these multipliers of well-being, and it helps them to understand why well-being has to do with them becoming more effective leaders and what it has to do with building a winning team. So Managers on the Move, again, this day-long workshop is built around three very simple domains: do, speak, and create. Very simply, do is to embody well-being, to lead by example. So we share with these managers who are participating in these Managers on the Move workshops the importance of them leading by example. Secondly, speak is to engage their team members in well-being, literally one conversation at a time. So it's one thing it's for an employee to receive an email blast that comes out from the HR department, let's say about an upcoming health fair. It's another thing for their manager to engage them in a conversation about well-being. And then finally, create, which is for every manager to think about how they might enable their team members with processes that make well-being easy and normal within the context of their team. And so what we're really emphasizing here is that no matter what's happening in the larger organization, you as a manager can create this little microculture within your team in which well-being is easy and normal. So this really moves beyond programs to really thinking about how can I as a manager start to create systems within my team? How can I as a manager do by taking advantage of those wellness offerings? How can I speak about it? And then again, how can I create those systems? So let me give you some examples of what these three actually look like in practice. So this is Kira Lewis here. She's a senior manager at Marriott International. And not only does she take the Zumba classes there that are offered, she actually teaches them. So this is a great example of a manager on the move who is engaging in do. Another great example of this is Susan Kinsler, who is the CFO at HealthStat. And she is practicing do by taking advantage of the on-site clinic. This is so critical for her team members to see her actually taking advantage of those offerings. Or take Tess Roaring. Tess Roaring is a senior manager, formerly with Athleta and now with Core Power Yoga. And she actually intentionally waits to work out until she gets to work, so that when she's at work, she can actually take advantage of those on-site yoga classes. And so she'll go to, say, that noontime yoga class, and not only will she go to it, but she'll actually speak about it with her team members, saying, hey, there's a noontime yoga class. Who would like to join me? Or take the human resources director at the city of Sioux Falls. And one of the things that we found after the implementation of Managers on the Move at the city of Sioux Falls is that many of those managers began talking about vacation time. So not only taking advantage of it themselves, but really sharing it out with their team members about how they will be taking advantage of that vacation time. So this is an email that he sent out to all of his team members. And then another manager who participated in Managers on the Move workshop, he noticed that after the workshop, he began asking his people on his team these, quote, real questions that mean a lot to them. Things like, what are you thankful for? Or what motivates you? Or if you could go anywhere, where would that be? And here's a manager from the Bay Area Community Resources, and she has created a system just for her team in which they have coloring time. So this is a nice way for all of them to restore and to regroup and boost their emotional well-being. Or take Mike Yurchuk, who, after engaging with Managers on the Move, a senior manager at Schindler, he now begins every one of his one-on-ones with a walking meeting. And the focus of this walking meeting is to build the relationship. And then for the second half of the one-on-one, then they go into an office space in which they, quote, get down to business. So these are all great examples of how managers are engaging in do, speak, and create. So we're now going to get tricky, and Brian is going to help out with this. And what I would like for all of you to do is I would like for you to think about the question, are managers in your organization practicing do, speak, and create? And if you could just select either yes or no. So generally speaking, are managers in your organization practicing do, speak, and create? So we'll give you about 5 more seconds on this. And so again, it doesn't need to be precise, but just thinking about very generally, would you say that managers in your organization are these multipliers of well-being by engaging in do, speak, and create? All right, Brian, I think if you want to give us the results, I think we're good enough here.
There we go. So we had wonderful voter turnout, 68%. And it looks like we have some people with some very engaged managers and very engaged workplaces. 57% said yes, their managers are practicing do, speak, and create. But that leaves the 43% who say no.
Excellent. Okay, thank you so much. So for those organizations in which you are seeing managers engaging in do, speak, create, congratulations. And for those who aren't seeing this, one takeaway might be to go back to your organization and literally make a list of all of the offerings in your organization around wellness and well-being. And you can send these out to every manager and ask them to self-assess. Am I doing speaking and creating around each of these offerings? That's really the low-hanging fruit here, is that managers start to take advantage of the offerings that are already in place, and then for them to begin thinking about, okay, what are some special systems that I can start to create for my team? So let's get into a little bit more of what this actual workshop looks like. So in addition to engaging in this self-inventory activity that we just did just here, we really think about creating an experience for those managers. So yes, it's important that they get the information, and very simply, the information is why wellness, why you, and what next, which is you need to engage in do, speak, create. But again, what really makes the impact is the fact that It is built around experience. So it looks like that I'm stuck here for 1 second. So hold on 1 sec. Okay, here we go. So the workshop itself, and here you can see a picture of managers from HealthStat, and you'll be hearing from Crockett in just a moment about the experience of how HealthStat experienced managers on the move. But you can see their managers lined up here practicing their favorite power poses. But one of the themes that runs throughout the workshop is this idea that it starts with you. So the way we emphasize this, one of the ways that we do this, is we have each of the managers write out a name tag, and on the side that is facing them, we ask them to write out, what is your purpose for the day? So we see here, for example, inspire others. We also have the managers engage in qualitative assessments throughout the workshop. So for example, one of the activities is we ask them to identify which of these images best captures your day-to-day experience. Which of these images best captures, would you say, where your team is, and which of these best captures where your organization is, and where would you like to be in terms of where you'd like your personally to be, where you'd like your team to be, and where you'd like your organization to be. And so we literally use flip books, as you can see here, where managers are responding to these prompts and then holding these up. And then right here we have a nice picture of Crockett Dale, CEO at HealthStat, engaging in this activity as well. We also ask the managers to envision what's possible. So just as Brian was talking about before, wellness is not just about mitigating risk. It's really about thriving and imagining what's possible and becoming our better selves and helping others to become their better selves, especially if we're in the role of being a manager. So we ask the managers in the workshop to create a collage that best represents what they think it means to thrive, and then they share these out with one another. And then, of course, a key component to this is to interact throughout. So one activity, for example, is we ask them to name 3 good things. And just this simple practice of naming 3 good things, research has shown that this can rewire our brains to become more optimistic and therefore more resilient in the face of stress. So we have the managers actually practice this activity, share with one another, and then encourage them to bring back this practice to their teams. And then, of course, we're really encouraging them to actually take action. Again, in these 3 domains of do, so we encourage them to assess where they are in 6 domains of well-being, and then to set a goal and to cement that goal with their favorite power pose. We talk about the idea, again, about speak. And so one of the activities that the managers engage in is actually writing a letter to go out to each of their team members around why they personally value well-being and why they're going to personally be going to engage in this and also bring it to their team members. And then finally, create. We talk about this idea how, just like Alice in Wonderland, most of us as humans, we pretty much can't help but eat or drink that which is put in front of us. So how can we, as a manager, think about designing nudges, which are really environmental prompts that make it easy, and cues, which are cultural prompts that make it normal? So again, this idea of no matter what's happening in the larger organization, I, as a manager, by engaging in do, speak, and create, I can create an oasis of well-being. And in doing so, I can create a pocket of excellence for my team that will create a ripple effect throughout the organization. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to talk about the impact of this day-long workshop.
Thanks, Laura. So there's no doubt that this is, and as you just heard, an amazing experience, but we really wanted to know whether or not it was effective, whether or not it had an impact on the participating managers and their team members. So from an evaluation perspective, our key concern was to rigorously examine the impact of the workshop from multiple angles, paying particular attention to the outcomes that we know to be of greatest interest to employers, which is productivity, engagement, and well-being. And then, of course, we wanted to know if we had an impact on the extent to which managers were doing, speaking, and creating. So to achieve that goal, we are administering validated assessments to managers and, where possible, also to their team members prior to and then 3 to 6 months after the workshop, so we can really see the different scores for both the participants and their team members. So first, we're going to talk about the managers. To date, we have pre- and post-assessments from just over 250 managers from the organizations that Laura shared with you earlier. And on the next slide, you can see that about half of the participating managers to date have been female, and on average, our participants are about 45 years old. Now, among the managers overall, we saw very dramatic effects of the workshop. So, for example, 61% of managers are reporting increased productivity. 50% of participating managers are reporting a bump in their engagement scores. 37% moved from suffering or struggling to thriving. And then 84% of managers were experiencing some increase in the extent to which they were doing, speaking, or creating. So I wanted to give you the overall picture, and now we're going to take sort of a deeper dive into each one of those results. So let's look at productivity first. To measure productivity, we're using the validated well-being assessment for productivity that ProChange developed in collaboration with Healthways and Gallup. And this is an important measure because it assesses well-being related barriers to productivity in two different domains, work and personal. So some work-related barriers to well-being might be issues with coworkers or supervisors, whereas a personal-related barrier to well-being, to presenteeism, or productivity might be financial well-being. So again, we're measuring them in these two buckets. And as you can see on the next slide, there was a statistically significant decrease in productivity loss because here lower scores are better. So we're measuring productivity loss. We see an improvement in productivity in both well-being related barriers at work and personal well-being related barriers to productivity. And that's exciting because often the well-being solutions that we implement on the individual level have an impact on the personal barriers to productivity, but not on the work barriers. And here we're seeing that the Managers on the Move experience has an impact on both. Okay, terrific. Now, we also measured engagement. And here we're using the UTRIC engagement scale that's widely used, including by APA and their national workplace health surveys. And what this measures is essentially a positive work-related state of mind that's characterized by dedication, absorption, and vigor. So this is the extent to which people are truly engaged in their work. And at pre-test, prior to participating in the Managers on the Move workshop, almost 50% of participating managers reported low or average engagement. And then on the next slide, you can see that at follow-up, 24% of those individuals, the managers who had reported low or average engagement, were reporting being highly engaged at follow-up. So that's an enormous increase in engagement, also very exciting. Now, in addition, we also saw substantial increases in well-being as measured by the Cantrell's Self-Anchoring Striving Scale. And I'm not sure how many of you have heard of this measure, but that's the longest name in the world for the shortest measure. It's two very quick items. We simply ask people to imagine a ladder from 0 to 10, and then ask them to assess where they are in their life right now on that ladder, and then we ask them to assess where on that ladder they expect to be 5 years from now. So you can do that in your own mind, where you are now on that ladder and where you expect to be 5 years from now. And then individuals who are 7 or better on current life and anything higher on future life are considered to be thriving. And that's, of course, where we want everyone to be. Individuals who are 4 or worse on both are suffering, and the individuals in the middle are struggling. And at pre-test, we saw that about 40% of managers were considered to be struggling or suffering, which, when you think about it, is a really sad state of affairs. But at follow-up, more than a third of them, a full 37%, reported that they had moved into the thriving category. So again, we're having a very big impact on well-being. Now, as I mentioned, in addition to those sort of objective measures, we also wanted to examine the extent to which the Managers on the Move workshop had any effect on the extent to which managers were doing, speaking, or creating. So we developed a quick self-report behavioral assessment of the extent to which managers were engaging in behaviors that were indicative of those 3 domains of managerial influence. So, for example, on the do subscale, we asked managers to how often they take time to do things to restore their energy. And as you can see on the next slide, there were statistically significant improvements in all 3 domains. So after participating in the workshop, managers are doing more, they're speaking more, and they're creating more. Now, we looked a little more specifically at which behaviors in the do domain managers were engaging in more often. And we were really pleased to see some large increases in some behaviors that traditional wellness programs don't necessarily have an impact on. So, for example, 30% of managers reported that they were feeling more grateful and sleeping more often. And almost 40% of the participating managers reported engaging in more self-care, which again sets a great example for their team members. Okay, the final thing we looked at with regard to the participating managers was the extent to which they were aware of well-being resources in their organization. So as Laura alluded to earlier, sometimes managers are not aware of the resources that already exist within their workplace, and the extent to which managers perceived that the organization cared about their well-being. And we're really pleased to see increases in those domains as well. Now, there's no doubt that those are really exciting results for the participating managers. Another really important question is, to what extent does that trickle down to the team members of the participating managers? So to date, we have data on just over 240 team members who were the team members of the managers who participated in the workshop. And in the same way that we measured the managers before and after, we administered a very similar set of measures to the team members. So for them, we're also measuring productivity, engagement, and well-being. And then for them, we're measuring the extent to which they're engaging in the same behaviors that are in the do domain for the participating managers. And we see really positive results, slightly moderated results, which is not surprising given that these are the team members of participating managers, but exciting nonetheless, with 60% of team members reporting increased productivity, 44% reporting higher engagement, a third moving from suffering or struggling to thriving, and as many as 47% of team members engaging in those behaviors that we're indicative of doing. So I'll just quickly go through these. You're seeing not significant, but still substantial increases in productivity. So we're seeing less presenteeism among the team members of participating managers. And then the next slide, you can also see that among the team members at baseline, we saw 15% moving from lower average engagement to highly engaged at post-test. And on the well-being assessment, we're seeing, again, a full third moving from suffering or struggling to thriving. And then on the influence, these are the do measures. We see a slight increase in the proportion of team members who are reporting that they're engaging in the behaviors on the subscale more, and still some, on the next slide, some exciting results about the specific behaviors with almost 30%, again, feeling more grateful, and almost 30% reporting that they're engaging in more self-care. So what I've been sharing with you is really the quantitative look at the impact of the workshop. And we do some qualitative assessment at the end of the workshop by asking folks what they loved about the workshop and what one thing is that they would change, which is important to help iterate the workshop over time. But what you're going to hear today is the qualitative reflection of Crockett Dale, who's the CEO of HealthStat, who has now offered the Managers on the Move workshop on 3 occasions to his team members, and also has generously offered it to some of his clients. So Crockett, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. My name is Crockett Dale. I'm the president and CEO of HealthStat. You could probably see on your screen our office where it has our name, HealthStat. Sarah shared with you the objective data, but I'd like to share the story of how our organization was transformed with this workshop in 45 days, where we have all now become change agents with a sense of empowerment. So a little bit about HealthStat. HealthStat is an on-site clinic company headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina, where it's been in business for over 15 years to provide services for middle to large clients across the U.S., where we currently have over 300 clinics with their placed on site to promote health and well-being for those employers that engage us. And so the reason employers love HealthStat is because its focus and leads on improving the health of a population, which also has benefits for productivity, being the employer of choice, and probably for the employers controlling their healthcare cost. What's unique about HealthStat and how it leads this endeavor to find out and profess and deliver upon how healthy a population can be is it works with ProChange, an exclusive relationship to embed the trans-theoretical model, finding people in their readiness to change, into the clinician's workflow. And so we've seen phenomenal results from that for the clients that we serve. But if you can imagine, to go create innovative solutions like that for employers that engage us, we weren't always doing and engaging the wellness that we were professing. So through our relationship with Dr. Sarah Johnson, she asked me to consider taking Laura's workshop. So based on that trust and that faith, I said, would be glad to. Then she said it lasted 8 hours and I needed to get the managers involved. And I know that they were very busy. And what they like to do is create new solutions that were innovative for our clients. But I thought it was a great idea. Can you imagine what they said after 8 hours of Laura's workshop, where Laura previously showed many of the things that she did to provide that health and do, speak, and create domains? They said, can Laura stay for another hour? It was that transformative. So there was one moment in Laura's session where I believe we signed a declaration of wellness independence. And at some point in time during that workshop, through the things that Laura has taught us, then it became clear that the managers could be the agents of change. They could control their own interest and also take the things that Laura gave us as managers to go be more proactive on our own health and our own well-being. So if you flip over to another slide, you may see example of such under the domain of do, where you see a person with an arrow's head, Daniel Stafford, where he took off and used that domain of do, where he took and they did a boot camp out in the parking lot. So you can't find anybody at HealthStat now that doesn't park further away from the parking lot where they try to get more steps in. Everybody and their brother is taking walking meetings. So we have more individuals that bike to work. We have people that take healthy selfies. We have what's called Wellness Wednesday. So an example of where we have a parking lot boot camp that is what we described here. So more people are eating healthy. I think that Sarah showed some of those results from the survey that we're included in. So we have fruit in our office now, where before people were trying to probably just not necessarily, although they knew that maybe fast food or other things weren't the best for them, they weren't making necessarily the effort, and they are today. And so now we have people that go to the gym. Not only do they go to the gym, they invite their teammates to go to the gym, and we're seeing people that have opportunities to collaborate with their communities to where they're seeing people be more active by leading by example. So part of our culture is for every new hire, we provide a book called Workplace Wellness That Works. It's a book that Laura Putnam has written, and it's a phenomenal book that you could go take and learn from your own self-introspection with the book, things that we use in our workshop from Laura to go help us be as healthy as we can be. We've incorporated the concept of management move into our trainings with our managers and our clinicians. So you see more standing desk at HealthStat. We created new cultural norms around taking the elevator. We used to love the elevator. We thought it was a great thing. Now we all take the stairs. We look at the elevator as a hindrance, not a helper now. So we've injected motion into every meeting we have, even when we meet with clients. If you've been in a meeting with me at some point in time, I'm probably going to ask you to do 5 squats. And so it's just a reminder of how motion can be injected into our daily lives if we just take that time to go make that a new habit. But the most powerful aspect of Laura's workshop was the enlightenment that continues today, is that the managers drive this wellness endeavor. It's not, to Laura's point, you know, as a CEO, as a leader, I could go give credence to it, support it. But what's fascinating was immediately after the workshop, everybody got involved. And so using some of those examples that I gave you. So, you know, if you follow that domain of do, then you also see the domain of well-being, where you see Daniel Stafford doing a physical activity. Here's an example of where somebody named Pam Hunt at HealthStat loaded up her car, collected items like diapers, and drove to Houston with water, because that was her way of being active to do. And so people would follow her leadership as a manager. And another slide you may see under the heading of speak, where you see Amanda Matthews and Chris Smith, our CIO, where they encouraged through their voice to go encourage the people that worked under their departments to go to an annual baseball game. So from the previous year, they doubled the participation from their departments just by their mere nature of being active and speaking about something. So that was, phenomenal result for us because, people follow the influence of the manager. Under the next slide, you may see create. You see Roger create a kickball team in a fantasy football league. This was under the domain of social. So it's just, if you can take away what physically you saw from Sarah's numbers, this is the actual view of what was it like on the ground, where the managers just took off and were able to go personalize the do, speak, and create in the ways that they felt empowered to go do that from that workshop. So you may see another picture, if Laura will advance it, to there's a dietitian, Carolyn Peterson, who created a cookbook. And so that was her interest. I can imagine a dietitian would want to create a cookbook. But what she did, if you look at another slide, she incorporated teammate in marketing, Jessica Chaparis, to go create a cookbook where all of our associates, our managers and our clinicians, created submissions to the cookbook. So they did this on their own. That's another example of create, where they felt empowered to go enjoy and advocate for well-being as a manager based on that workshop. So it changed the way HealthStat did everything, and it has created a ripple effect and interest from our clients. We have started a movement. So I would like to turn it back to Sarah and Laura to go share with you some key learnings about what we came away with that may apply to someone interested in such a workshop to go change their culture.
So again, as Sarah spoke about, one of the key aspects to managers on the move is that we have been learning as we go. And while we have certainly seen a lot of success, as Sarah just shared, as did Crockett, we know that we can continue to improve upon it. So we thought it would be helpful for us to share with you what are some of our key learnings to help you and what you bring back to your organization, so you also can inspire a manager-driven movement, and by encouraging your managers to engage in these three domains of do, speak, and create. And just as Crockett spoke about, while the name Managers on the Move connotes just physical activity, in the context of this workshop, we're really emphasizing this idea of thriving in multiple domains of well-being, including things like social and financial and community, and career certainly is a big one. So not just physical, and certainly also emotional as well. So what we'd like to do is just share with you 4 big key learnings that we have come away with here that, again, that you can bring back. So the first is the importance of creating a compelling experience. So when Crockett shared, for example, a lot of managers, when they think, oh man, I've got to spend 8 hours in a day-long workshop, are you kidding me? And what we have found is, while they think that this is going to be kind of a death by PowerPoint experience, sitting for 8 hours listening to some wellness nut lecture to them and shame them, what instead they discover is that this is, as you saw by some of those images, and those are images actually taken at these workshops, that instead it is a compelling experience. And that's what really moves these managers. And we talk a lot about how they need to shift their mindset to becoming these agents of change, and that they need to in turn create a compelling experience that is has a strong emotional component to it. And so we really think about, how do we create that emotionally driven experience in the context of this workshop. And so we really encourage you, when you do your own efforts to build a manager-driven movement within your organization, how can you move your managers one experience at a time?
Terrific. And Laura, also, as people are thinking about creating their own manager-led initiatives, it's really important to think through how to systematically evaluate those impacts. A, so you can demonstrate the impact and continue to justify them, but B, so that you can continue to tweak and iterate over time to ensure that, in fact, it is creating that type of movement you're looking for. So as you saw, we have combined a set of existing validated assessments on key metrics of interest to employers, like productivity, engagement, and well-being, in addition to creating our own measure of the specific behaviors that we're trying to target within the workshop. And really systematically evaluating that both before and after the workshop has given us some nice data to demonstrate this, in fact, is a powerful experience. And we do plan to continue to evaluate the participating managers over time to investigate the longer-term longitudinal effects of the workshop.
Sarah, thank you. I think that this is Crockett. What I've learned following what Laura's lead was about an iterative solution is that it's how you position it and it's how you describe it. If you think about what I said, Sarah says, okay, well, you've got so much marginal utility of trust with me, so take it. I was like, okay, I will. But how do you have that same level of trust? What I've learned, and if you may not remember this, but there's an icon on one of Laura's slides that talks about the clients that work with her Cobb County. HealthStat brings all of its great clients to something called HealthStat University, and they get to see Laura in person. So then they come away saying, this was a great endeavor. How can I take that workshop back to my associates? What I've learned is that if you come back and position it as a wellness endeavor, that doesn't always have the same interest and appetite as if you positioned it as a leadership development program. So it's all in how you couch something, and then there may be a different funding mechanism within your organization under learning and development, as opposed to trying to solicit the funding mechanism for the workshop under a health and wellness promotion benefit. So the critical takeaway for me was, how do you position it and how do you fund it? Because there's different ways to do that.
Excellent, Crockett. And I think the final key learning that is increasingly clear to each of us is how important it is to provide ongoing follow-up communications to help sustain the momentum that's created by this really compelling experience. And that can take a variety of forms. So as Crockett alluded to, there are book clubs at HealthStat and in some of the other organizations. We're talking about providing ongoing support to really enhance other domains of well-being so that managers have the opportunity to participate and speak about those. And the possibility of providing ongoing communications to the managers themselves as essentially booster communications to help remind them of this compelling experience and all the ways in which they can really make an impact on both their own lives and the lives of their team members.
That's great feedback, Sarah. This has been a very powerful thing for HealthStat, and just like we started a manager-driven movement at HealthStat, so can you. So we're now going to open it up to the floor for questions, and hopefully then Brian can field those questions and send them back to Laura or Sarah.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to jump straight in with some of the questions that we are getting from the audience. The first two I'll direct at Sarah because they really are about the assessments themselves. So one of the questions was, when was the post-assessment administered after the workshop? If I had to guess, and I do, I think what the question is really about is the durability of some of the effects. And then again, well, let's take that question first.
Sure. That's a great question. So depending on the participating organization, the post-workshop assessment was administered sometime between 3 to 6 months after the workshop was offered. And as I alluded to, we too are curious about the longer-term effects. So we are exploring the possibility of doing another post-assessment, maybe 12 months out. But we are really pleased with the magnitude of the effects that we're seeing 3 to 6 months later.
Okay. And again, could you maybe go over again some of the measures that were used before and after the trainings? You talked a little bit about the Utrecht scale. You talked a little bit about the Cantrell scale. This is an IBI audience. They're really big on evidence, as you can tell, but they're also big on practical guidance. So, for example, if I had to guess, what we're looking for are the kinds of measures that would have been available to, for example, to HealthStat before Managers on the Move started.
So it's an interesting question, Brian. There are some measures that we are administering as part of the workshop experience, the overall workshop effort. That, as you alluded to, that includes the UTRIC and the Cantrell, but also the well-being assessment for productivity, which is another self-report validated measure of productivity that ProChange developed in collaboration with Healthways in a previous initiative. And then the other measures included that sort of inventory of doing, speaking, and creating that we developed specifically for the Managers on the Move initiative. And then a few other self-report items about, for example, the perception that the organization cares about your well-being and your level of awareness of existing resources within the organization. Now, you're, I think, raising an important question about could those data be married with other data that the employer may have available to them? And that is certainly the case and something that we have spoken to some employers about. So, for example, if they had absenteeism data or other important data about productivity that we could compare to the self-reported data that we're getting on the well-being assessment for productivity, we're absolutely in agreement that that would be an important thing to do.
And Brian, if I can just jump in really quickly to add on to what you were talking about, kind of the distinction between the measuring of impact of programs like this and then the solution itself, is that this collaboration was really the collaboration between Motion Infusion and ProChange, and now working with HealthStat as well, is really based on the belief that none of us can be a one-stop shop where we provide all solutions. And Motion Infusion is founded by a former urban public high school teacher. I actually taught history, and which you may think has absolutely nothing to do with workplace wellness, except that it has everything to do with it, is in that I have a lot of experience in how to create engaging learning experiences. And that's really the magic behind Managers on the Move, is that it is created and delivered by someone who has experience in how to create an engaging learning experience. Now, do I have experience and expertise in how to develop and deliver and conduct a meaningful assessment tool? Absolutely not. And so this is why we partnered with ProChange, who is an expert in this area, and to really be able to provide a way to meaningfully measure the impact beyond the qualitative types of questions that Sarah spoke about, that we do incorporate in the workshop itself by asking the managers at the end, you know, what were you expecting? What did you get? What did you love? What would you change? But really moving beyond those kinds of straightforward assessments in the context of the workshop to really look at how do we more meaningfully measure that. And then the third player in this being HealthStat, to really start to look at how can they bring it to their organization, but then in turn start to bring this as a solution to their clients as well, with a particular focus on using this workshop to help increase rates of utilization of the on-site clinics that they provide.
Laura, this is Crockett. One of the things maybe to support Brian's question for his group is that we've seen, and obviously the slides, that it was widely accepted at HealthStat, but HealthStat also has an actuary on its staff that will start to study how that data from the behavioral science becomes behavioral economics, because to Laura's point, she's a behavioral engagement leader. And so when you combine the combination of all three of those, then I think then it's iterative where you'll have a more meaningful output. So we've seen phenomenal results, but then how do you quantify that and qualify that? And that's our work to be done.
I think that leads to the next question that I was going to ask, which is right now when we look at productivity measures, especially self-reported, whether you're talking about the WPAI, the HPQ, or any of these other acronyms out there, I think so much of this goes into the narrative of how they're used. And so, for example, I think people will generally believe that somebody whose well-being in every other dimension tends to be better is going to cite better productivity and better performance. I mean, it's on its face, healthier people are likely to be on the job more often, putting in a better performance. And I think the real question comes down to how do you then, and this goes back to Crockett, is how do you then translate that into the performance of the business? Is it always the case that you are ultimately going to have to see some kind of financial impact? Or is the business model of HealthStat or some other company, for example, so clear cut that you understand performance and productivity are going to be the drivers? What do you really need in terms of evidence?
How about this is Sarah. How about if I answer the first part of the question, then Crockett can answer the question about what, as a CEO of an organization, does he need to see as evidence to implement a program of this nature?
By all means.
Okay, great. So I think that what's unique about the WBAP as an assessment of productivity is that, unlike other productivity measures, it's not measuring the impact of a specific condition or physical limitation on productivity, but rather a whole cadre of well-being related barriers. So you saw things like issues with your supervisor or lack of resources, and then financial concerns or the strain of caring for a loved one. So there are a variety of barriers outside of a specific chronic condition or physical limitation that could impinge on someone's well-being. So they're not necessarily directly correlated to health. And I think that's one of the advantages of this measure. But it, like you're pointing out, it is a self-report measure. So I'll let Crockett answer about the extent to which these productivity data or other data are part of his decision-making around implementing a solution of this nature.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think that if I understand both you and Brian, what we're trying to do is take the subjective and make it objective. And so in my view as a CEO, based on what you said, how would I view that? And I can tell you that I have seen what I would call phenomenal results at HealthStat from key performance indicators that we measure from turnover. And so we have what we feel like from our culture, low turnover anyway, but from after this workshop, it's even lower because we feel like that was an attribution point to that workshop. So that would be one way you could measure and turn that into monetization by saying, well, then what did it cost to train somebody? What does it cost to retain somebody? But to your point, I believe that you have to work on things that Sarah and I are currently engaged in building out as a cultural well-being and health promotion assessment tool, because what we see is each company we work with has a different culture and how they promote, support endeavors such as this. And so you'd want to know how they measure productivity. It's very difficult to go measure it post. You want to go set it up for you at the baseline on what that looks like, because each individual company, each individual CEO may have a different baseline of how they measure productivity.
And Brian, if I can add in one more piece about this, the value proposition that is proposed in the context of the workshop is, and the message that is given throughout is that this is really about becoming a better leader. So as I was mentioning before, do you as a manager and as a leader, do you have the energy that you need to be an effective leader? And then secondly, this is about building a winning team. So if your team is exhausted and worn out, they're not going to be a high-performing team. And I think that is really important for these managers to understand the value of it right here and right now, and also for them to really understand the research that's out there showing, for example, there's a study that came out recently showing that for every hour that a manager spends on after hours emails to their team members roughly translates to an added 20 minutes of after hours email time for each of their team members. So it's really important for the managers to understand the mirroring effect that they create. And so this is important not only for their own personal effectiveness as a leader, but also for the effectiveness of their team.
Great points both. And I really like the emphasis of this talk, quite frankly, on managers and getting their buy-in and getting their perspective. I think it's safe to say that they're the ones who really have the day in, day out impact on productivity, but they're also the ones who are closest to it. And so I think a lot of times, as you know, and I'll bring IBI in for this criticism as well, when we're looking at evidence, when we are looking at empirical findings, we are often speaking levels above. We are speaking to the C-suite if we can. We're speaking to the purchaser of benefits. We're speaking to the HR department. When really evidence that a manager finds convincing through their own experience and through something that mirrors their own experience, and I think, again, the metrics you're talking about meet that criteria, I think that's where a lot more of the convincing and the evidence needs to be directed.
That's exactly right. And one of the things that's really interesting that we also talk about in the context of the workshop is that every manager not only manages down, for lack of a better word, but they also manage up. And what we have seen in some very specific cases is actually instances where the C-suite is outright opposed to the concept of well-being. They see it as a waste of time. And over time, it was actually the managers who kind of managed up and ultimately got the C-suite on board. And the only reason why those managers were doing that was because they were so moved by the experience. So that you know, in one particular case, an organization brought us in to deliver this Managers on the Move workshop that was specifically for their high potential managers as part of this kind of leadership odyssey, they called it. And then that sparked a whole manager-driven movement within the organization, despite the fact that the CEO actually was not in support of it. And so then the head of safety was like, "Whoa, that's so cool that you all had a leadership odyssey. Can we have a safety odyssey where we train the managers, the safety managers, to understand the connection between safety and health, and then bring that to their teams?" And then again, following that, then the head of HR was like, "Wow, that's really cool that you did that. Can we bring that to our HR managers?" And so this was something that, again, kind of like spread throughout the organization, but was really driven by those managers. And then ultimately, the CEO came around and was like, "Okay, great. You know, I see the value of it. Let's start to more intentionally bring well-being into our organization," and then it brought in an explicit well-being program. But up to that time, there was no wellness program in place at that organization. And again, it started because of this manager-driven movement.
You know, you've prefigured the last question, and it's going to have to be a comment in which that the, you know, do, speak, create on the one hand can be seen as a framework that is giving managers freedom and autonomy and this kind of social connectedness that can help them build a common goal, which is going to actually accrue to the bottom line. And again, they put that in the form of a question. I don't think we're going to have a lot of time left for you to get behind that, but it sounds like the kinds of comments that you're making seem to fall in line with that.
Excellent. Well, I see we have one more minute, and Sarah and I wanted to share a couple of final thoughts, if we could, Brian.
Last word.
Excellent.
Okay.
So, Sarah?
Great. My final thought is that as an inventor, Edison made 1,000 unsuccessful attempts at inventing the light bulb. And when asked how that felt, he replied, "I didn't fail 1,000 times. It was an invention with 1,000 steps." So in the same way, Managers on the Move has evolved significantly and will continue to evolve, and we're going to iterate in that same spirit.
And so I encourage each one of you on the call today to channel your inner superhero and start a movement in your organization, and specifically a manager-driven movement, by empowering each of your managers to practice do, speak, and create. So as a final slide here, we would like to offer you all the opportunity. If you would like a copy of the slides, you are welcome to email me, laura@motioninfusion.com. And this webinar will also be archived. So if you would like to listen into it again or share it with friends, it will be available for you to do that. And again, I wanted, on behalf of Crockett and Sarah and myself, I want to say thank you to all of the attendees today, and also a giant thank you to IBI for hosting this webinar today.
Thank you very much, Laura, Sarah, and Crockett. And thank you all for joining, and I will see you all at the forum next week. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.